Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi walked out of a meeting with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang in Beijing yesterday, May 6th. That meeting has been covered everywhere. Most outlets are calling it a diplomatic signal of China's desire for peace, a push by Beijing for Hormuz to reopen, a sign that China is applying pressure on Iran before Trump arrives in Beijing on May 14th. I want to argue that framing is wrong. Not partially wrong, structurally wrong. And the reason it is wrong tells you more about where this negotiation is actually going than anything being discussed in the 14-point proposal the media is focused on today. Here is the detail that almost nobody covering this story has treated as the central fact. Araghchi did not just visit Beijing. He briefed China on Iran's negotiating position. According to the official Chinese Foreign Ministry readout of the meeting, Araghchi gave Wang a detailed account of, and these are the exact words from Beijing's statement, the latest developments in Iran-US negotiations and Iran's next steps. Iran's next steps. China was not told that talks are ongoing. China was told specifically what Iran plans to do next. And Trump walks into Beijing in 7 days. That sequence is not diplomacy as usual. That is, the information architecture of this entire negotiation made visible in a single official readout. And once you understand what that sequence means structurally, you read the 14-point proposal, the 30-day window, Trump's very good talks comment, all of it differently. Let me explain exactly what happened in that Beijing room, and why it matters more than any leaked document circulating today. Start with what Araghchi actually did in Beijing, and what he left behind. This was not a phone call. Wang and Araghchi have spoken by phone at least 3 times since the war started on February 28th. This was the first in-person visit by any senior Iranian official to China since the war began. That distinction matters enormously. Phone calls produce readouts. In-person meetings produce conversations that never appear in any readout at all. The things Araghchi said to Wang in that room in Beijing are not in the Chinese Foreign Ministry statement. They are not in Iran's Foreign Ministry statement. They are not in any press briefing. They are in Wang Yi's head, and Wang sits across from Trump in 7 days. Araghchi told reporters after the meeting that the discussion covered how the war will end, matters related to Iran's nuclear program, sanctions, Hormuz, and the negotiations currently underway. That is not a summary of talking points exchanged between allies. That is a briefing. Iran walked its most important strategic partner through the full architecture of its negotiating position. The nuclear question, the Hormuz question, sanctions relief, the war's end state, all of it. 1 week before China's president sits down with the American president. I call this the first listener advantage. The country that hears Iran's real terms first, not the public positions, not the press conference language, but the actual private floor of what Iran will accept, has a structural advantage over every other country that arrives later. And right now, China just became the first listener. America is still waiting for Iran's formal response to the 14-point proposal. Pakistan is still mediating. And China just received a personal briefing from Iran's chief diplomat on Iran's next steps. Now look at what the 2 readouts from that same meeting tell you, because this is the specific detail that makes the information asymmetry visible. China's foreign ministry published its statement on the meeting and included a call for the prompt resumption of shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. That sentence was in Beijing's readout. When Iran's foreign ministry published its own statement about the exact same meeting, that sentence was not there. The same meeting produced 2 statements, and the most important line in China's version was completely absent from Iran's version. That is not an accident. Governments choose every word in official statements carefully. When Iran's foreign ministry publishes a readout of a bilateral meeting and deliberately removes the line about reopening Hormuz that the other party published, Iran is communicating something precise to anyone paying attention. Iran is telling you that what China says publicly and what Iran agreed to privately are 2 different things. China said reopen Hormuz promptly. Iran's statement said nothing about reopening Hormuz. The gap between those 2 documents is where Iran's real position lives. And Wang now knows exactly what is inside that gap, in a way that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner do not. Let me add another layer, because there is something Araghchi said publicly after the meeting that the coverage has treated as a confidence boast, but is actually a strategic signal to anyone reading it carefully. Speaking to Iranian state media after his talks with Wang Araghchi said China believes that Iran after the war is different from Iran before the war. He said China acknowledges that Iran has proven its capabilities and strength, and has gained what he called an elevated international standing. Read that statement not as rhetoric. Read it as the thing Iran needed confirmed before it finalizes its negotiating position. Iran needed its most important strategic partner to validate the premise that Iran has emerged from 68 days of conflict from a position of strength rather than desperation. China gave Iran that validation in person, in a room, the day before Iran is supposed to deliver its response to the American proposal. That validation matters because Iran is now responding to the 14-point framework with the confidence of a country whose most powerful economic backer has just told it to its face that the world sees it differently than America does. Trump said very good talks. Iran called the proposal an American wish list. A senior Iranian parliament member named Ibrahim Rezai dismissed the framework as unrealistic. Those two positions are not contradictory. Trump is describing the fact that conversations are happening. Iran is describing the terms it will accept. China, which heard both sides of that gap in Beijing yesterday, is now the only party that can actually see how wide it is. Now let me explain why China is in no hurry to close that gap, and why the May 14th summit is not what most people think it is. America has been pressuring China publicly and directly to use its leverage over Iran to push Tehran toward a deal. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said on Monday that China should step up and get the Iranians to open the strait. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said at a briefing that he hopes China tells Araghchi what he needs to be told. The American assumption behind both statements is that China wants the same outcome America wants: an open Hormuz, a weakened Iran, a deal on American terms, and that China is simply a pressure mechanism America can activate toward that goal. That assumption is wrong in a specific and important way. China does not want the same outcome America wants. China wants a surviving Iran, a flowing Hormuz, and a demonstrated role for Beijing as the indispensable mediator in the resolution. Those three things are related, but they are not the same as what America is asking China to deliver. If China pressures Iran into accepting a deal on American terms, China has spent its leverage to produce an outcome that serves Washington. If China positions itself as the country whose relationship with both Tehran and Washington was the bridge that made any deal possible, China exits this conflict as the world's most consequential diplomatic actor, regardless of what the terms of the deal actually say. Wang Yi confirmed this positioning explicitly at the meeting. He told Araghchi that China supports Iran's national sovereignty and security, including, and this is the Washington Times reporting from the official readout, through the enrichment of uranium. China's foreign minister told Iran's foreign minister in Beijing that China supports Iran's right to enrich uranium. That is not the statement of a country that is executing American pressure strategy. That is the statement of a country that has decided the post-war architecture of the Middle East runs through Beijing. And here is what makes China's position particularly precise. China has also, in the same week, invoked a blocking rule for the first time, a rarely used legal mechanism directing Chinese companies not to comply with American sanctions targeting Chinese refiners buying Iranian crude. Beijing has chosen the week before Trump arrives for his summit to formally tell Chinese businesses that Washington's sanctions on Iranian oil purchases do not apply to them. That is not the behavior of a country preparing to deliver Iran to America's negotiating terms. That is a country expanding the infrastructure of Iran's economic survival at the exact moment the diplomatic window is supposedly closing. Let me be fair to the optimistic reading, because it deserves a genuine test. The argument for optimism is that Araghchi's Beijing visit actually serves the deal's prospects. Iran went to China to get backing for a diplomatic solution. Wang Yi pressed Iran on Hormuz in person. Araghchi responded by saying the Hormuz issue can be resolved as soon as possible. That is more flexibility than Iran has shown publicly in weeks. The 30-day window in the 14-point framework is designed precisely to let both sides save face while moving toward a functional arrangement. China hosting Iran the week before the Trump-Xi summit creates a specific window where Beijing can deliver something on Iran to Washington as part of a broader trade-off. And Trump needs that something badly given rising domestic fuel prices and midterm elections looming in November. All of that is real. Araghchi did say Hormuz can be resolved quickly. Trump did say very good talks. The 30-day framework is genuinely on the table. But here is what that argument cannot account for. Wang Yi told Araghchi that China supports Iran's uranium enrichment. China published that line in its official statement. That means China has publicly committed in a documented foreign ministry readout to a position on the nuclear question that directly contradicts America's core demand that Iran suspend enrichment. The American proposal currently being negotiated is down from 20 years of enrichment suspension to 12 years, according to Axios. Iran's position remains that enrichment is a sovereign right, and China has now said publicly that it agrees with Iran on that point. If the deal that emerges from the 30-day window does not address the enrichment question on American terms, China can truthfully say it supported Iran's position throughout. If the deal does address it, China gets credit for the compromise. Beijing wins both outcomes because Beijing has positioned itself on Iran's side of the most contested question, while appearing to support the diplomatic process simultaneously. Now watch 3 specific things in the days ahead because they will tell you more than any official statement. The first is the content of the Iran response delivered to Pakistan today. Iran was expected to hand its reply to mediators on Thursday, which is today. Watch specifically for whether Iran's response includes any language about uranium enrichment timelines, or whether it defers that question to the 30-day negotiation window. If Iran defers the uranium question, it is following a strategy of getting America to sign a framework first and negotiate the hardest points later. That strategy is most useful to a country that has already coordinated its nuclear position with its most powerful backer, which is what Araghchi did in Beijing yesterday. The second is whether any American official publicly addresses the fact that Araghchi briefed China on Iran's next steps before Iran delivered its response to the American proposal. Rubio mentioned Beijing at his briefing. He said he hoped China would tell Iran what it needs to be told. But Rubio did not say that Iran told China what Iran plans to do before telling America. If no American official names that specific sequencing, it means Washington has decided acknowledging it creates a problem it cannot solve before May 14th. The third is the joint communique that comes out of the Trump-Xi summit. Watch for the word Iran and what surrounds it. If the summit produces language about both sides supporting a diplomatic resolution, with no reference to enrichment or the specific terms of any framework, China has maintained its ambiguity. If the summit produces a specific joint statement on Iran's nuclear program, China has used the intelligence it gathered from Araghchi's briefing to craft language both sides can claim as a win. The second outcome is the one China has been building towards since Araghchi landed in Beijing. Push back on this if you see it differently. Read the official Chinese Foreign Ministry readout of the Wang and Araghchi meeting. Find the line about the prompt resumption of shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. Then read Iran's Foreign Ministry statement about the exact same meeting and find where that line is. It is not there. Read what Araghchi said China's own assessment of Iran's post-war standing is. Read what Wang said about China supporting Iran's right to enrich uranium. Read what China's Ministry of Commerce said about American sanctions on Chinese refiners just days before this meeting. Then ask the question that no press briefing is asking today. America has spent 68 days trying to pressure Iran into terms it can accept. Iran spent yesterday in Beijing briefing the country that sits across from America's president in 7 days. Whatever Iran told China in that room is now part of the context Trump walks into on May 14th. America does not know what was said in that room. China does. And Iran left Beijing knowing exactly where its most powerful partner stands before it hands its formal response to the 14-point proposal today. That is not a diplomatic visit. That is sequencing. And whoever controls the sequence controls what the deal says when it finally gets written.